Welcome to Fintech Daydreaming, the podcast that dives into the world of banking technologies and the ever-changing landscape of fintech companies. We bring you real-life examples from global and local thought leaders, as well as experts working within the financial industry, and seek out the best stories from the front lines of financial services innovation, where dreams of industry pioneers meet reality. Hosted by Paul Krogdahl and Ville Sontu. This is Fintech Daydreaming.
Hello and welcome back to Fintech Daydreaming. This is your bi-weekly Nordic Fintech highlights episode that we always record with Paul and Janne, both of whom are here with me right now. So again, let's start with the usual. Paul, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm actually suffering from a deep philosophical conundrum that has been keeping me awake now for close on a week, and I think it's going to keep pestering me for a little while longer. It's meaningful, deep, and disrupting everything in my life, and it's whether I actually need to go and get my bloody haircut or not.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, if you're watching the video, I guess you can cast your vote in the comments on whether Paul needs a haircut or not, and I will kind of keep my opinion to myself on that one. But yes, I think that's a very important step in your life to get that done. So congratulations when you get up to it and around to doing it. So, and you will tell me afterwards, I believe.
I don't think I need to tell you. If I go and get my hair cut, you'll see it. Actually, no, you're a man. And we all know that men are useless at noticing when other people get their hair cut, like their lovers or their partners. So maybe you won't, unless I get it shaved off completely. And then you might sort of go, oh, by the way, there's something slightly different with you. I can't quite put my finger on it, but, tell me, what has happened? But yes.
I mean, we are increasingly acting like a married couple, so it all tracks, I think. So it is what it is. But so again, let's get moving with the episode as well. I just want to say that we are closing up on towards May here now in the Nordics, and I'm looking forward to having a nice long weekend around the turn of April and May, and looking forward to leaving for Berlin tomorrow, which is going to be fantastic, spending the long weekend there. And no, we're not going to get into Berghain if anybody wants to is curious about that. But let's see what else we can get up to when we get to Berlin.
So is this your way of trying to get our listeners to help you to get in, even though by the time we publish this, you would have been there? But this is like your secret, hey, all listeners in Germany, next time I'm there, can you please help me get in?
That's true. Yes, exactly. So again, if there's anyone there who knows a good trick to how to get to Berghain, do let me know. It would be fun to experience that one day. Knowing that with my age and my kind of looks, there's no way I can actually get there in the conventional means. So we'll see if this leads into something in the future. But again, enough about Berghain and Berlin and the upcoming Vappu celebrations. Janne, how are you? And how are you planning to spend the May Day celebrations here in Finland?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I'm quite busy at work, but yeah, maybe for Vappu I have to take some time off. And so far the forecast looks very nice. So sounds like picnic and champagne to me.
Yeah, that's the traditional way of spending the Vappu, also known as May Day, here in Finland for sure. Excellent. And bad news on the weather, by the way. I changed the winter tires to my car yesterday, so that usually means that there's going to be snow quite soon. So let's see how that goes. Anyway, so close to Vappu, and we'll see if we get the good weather or not. But hey, we are here to talk about fintech news for April this time around. And let's get started with the usual way of handling the news episode, which is asking Janne that how has April been overall compared to the other months so far this year?
So April was actually fairly busy, so looks promising, especially on the funding side. There were quite a few rounds, a bunch of smaller rounds, especially in the payment side. Agentic commerce is super trendy in many ways. And then a couple of bigger rounds. So one of the digital SME bank, they raised 10 million euros, and Performative, the wealth management platform, so they raised 14 million US dollars, so pretty good sums. And then otherwise, a lot of partnerships, AI bus launches, and so on. So I would say quite nice month overall.
Interesting, because we were just in our pre-episode chat we had between the three of us, both me and Paul were complaining that it seemed to be a bit of a slow month, or maybe a little bit of a dry month. I mean, we saw a lot of headlines, but many of them were kind of middle of the lane, I would say. But you're saying actually it was a busy month in terms of funding.
Yeah, funding is usually a good sign.
Do we see any correlation here, Janne, between the current, can I say, economical financial climate in Finland and funding for Finnish fintechs? Are the Finnish fintechs suffering because of the financial climate in Finland at the moment, or do you not see any of that correlation in the news and trends?
I wouldn't say it correlates too much. Most of the tech companies are still aiming to be global, and the funding comes from abroad. So even if the local situation would be uncertain, it doesn't affect the fintech companies that much.
Interesting.
Indeed, and I'm going to be curious about the agentic payments and agentic commerce angle towards the Nordics. A lot of the kind of trend indicators and consultants and all the hype around the conferences, as we have discussed many times before, points towards AI, and specifically around agentic AI. And everybody keeps on saying that 2026 is going to be the year when this really starts to make a difference. And even though we haven't really seen that kind of on the ground impact of this agentic commerce yet, I think these funding rounds and all this activity are now for the kind of first half of this year would indicate that maybe there's something coming in scale as well in the Nordics in the second half. I remain a bit unconvinced that I think the people usually overestimate the speed of things when these things are moving forward. So I wouldn't put maybe this year as the turning point, but maybe coming 2-3 years. Again, this might take some time, but it's definitely a big trend that a lot of people believe in, including myself. Excellent. Let's get a move on with the news. So as usual, if you haven't been following us before, what we do now is each of us is going to pick a news story from the newsletter of in this time April, and we're going to have a bit of a chat around all of this. And before we do that, we do have a tradition that we have to honor, of course, which is that we need to have a very bad fintech-related or banking-related joke in the episode. And of course, as usual, in these types of episodes, that responsibility falls on Janne's shoulders. So, Janne, I believe you promised that you have a bad joke for us again.
Yes, terrible one.
Okay, go for it.
So, why did the payment terminal go to the dentist?
It was obscure. I have no idea. It had a toothache.
It had a Bluetooth.
Oh, Jesus.
I actually went to the dentist yesterday again, so maybe that's kind of topical. But maybe I need to also mention that Bluetooth payments in general have not really worked. I believe, despite so many attempts around the world to use Bluetooth for the in-store payments piece, has not worked. And if there's somebody listening that knows of an example where it actually worked and became like a big way for people to pay, do let us know. But at least the things that we have seen here in the Nordics have failed fairly miserably. So maybe that joke was a clue towards the direction that maybe we need to use NFC instead. Even the Bluetooth jokes are bad.
Isn't Bluetooth Swedish? Named by some Viking guy, all right? Sounds like that.
Wasn't it Danish? No, I don't know. But it was named after a Viking king, I believe. So the Bluetooth is a reference to that. Now, whether or not Bluetooth is a Swedish invention, I don't think it is. It was kind of one of these standards that was developed by like this consortium, so it's really hard to say who actually invented. It was a kind of a multinational effort back in the days when these kind of wireless standards were developed all over the place. So I think it has a complicated history, but let's see. We can come back to that in the next episode. We will tell you all about Bluetooth if you're really interested. And maybe we have also learned that there actually is a successful Bluetooth payment solution somewhere in the world that we just haven't heard of, and we can talk about that as well. But good, let's move forward again and get to the news piece. And as usual, we have picked a random order to go, and this time the lucky winner is Paul to talk first about the piece of news that he picked from the newsletter. So Paul, which one did you pick and why?
Like we said, there wasn't a huge amount of news articles in the newsletter this time, but there were some interesting ones. And following on from the whole point of agentic AI and agentic payments, etc., that you covered a second ago, Villa, I'm following on to that. I found a news article that was interesting. Now, I've always been known for saying that the future of banking will be dominated by platforms, and I still believe that very, very strongly. We sort of went from open APIs to open banking, PSD2, PSD3. We then started talking about embedded finance. Embedded finance is growing. The next evolution of that really is agentic payments. It's this whole notion that payments and commerce is going to shift from human interaction and human intervention to machine and agent action. So the whole channel for banks changed, the whole channel for payments changes. And I think we're going to see a steady march here. Like you said, it's not going to be an explosion. I think we're going to see an awful lot of things changing in 2026, partially driven by the accelerated development of AI capabilities, AI agents, generative AI, etc. But particularly in banking and payments, I think one of the things that's going to put a brake on a little bit is the fact that you start getting issues around consent management. You start getting issues around fraud management. You start getting issues around fundamentally knowing, can the vendor be sure that this agent is a valid agent? Is the agent really acting on behalf of an individual, etc.? So I think these elements is going to slow down the progress rather than the technology. I think the technology is going to be able to do it. It's going to happen very fast, but then there's going to be other elements around it. Like we've always said, banks are risk averse and risk focused for a reason. They're designed that way and they're going to continue being that way. And the whole industry is going to be, because at the end of the day, we don't want to lose people's money. But based on that, there is an interesting fintech in Sweden called SolvaPay. They are Stockholm-based. They were founded in 2025, and they just received a 2.5 million pre-seed funding to build, they are saying to build payment infrastructure for what they're calling the Agentic Economy. So this is exactly this space. I would say, reading into the article, they are saying payment infrastructure. I don't quite see it as infrastructure. They're going to sit on top of existing payment infrastructure. In actual fact, if I read through this in more detail, they have partnered with Stripe. So, the payment infrastructure to a certain degree, if you look at this stack, you've got Stripe, etc. And then you've got SolvaPay sitting on top of that. But the critical element that they are bringing in is to try and solve an awful lot of these issues around identification, security, validation, etc., to enable agent-to-agent communication and agent-to-agent commerce, right? And it's this to me, I think, is really exciting and interesting. This really is taking that next step towards the platformification of the banking industry. It is fundamentally going to change yet again what I see as being the channel structure, channel strategy, and channel execution for most banks. Because the channels for banks went from being branch to being web to being mobile to being embedded. Now it's going to become agent to agent. that's a fundamental shift in how banks need to look at their channel strategy going forwards, particularly for supporting payments, etc. So I think this is really interesting. I think I think it should be more money actually going as pre-seed funding towards SolvaPay. I think they're doing something interesting, but at the same time, it's already become what I see as being quite a crowded domain. Visa are doing lots of stuff in this space. MasterCard are doing an awful lot in this space. Stripe obviously has done a lot here already. So it'll be interesting to see whether SolvaPay can actually carve out a niche for themselves in this, or whether they just become another Me Too or noise in what is rapidly becoming a crowded space. And like you said, it's becoming a crowded space because everybody wants to put Gen AI into their messaging, into their unique value proposition. And before you know it, a little bit back to the early days of blockchain, it is suddenly everywhere, everything. How do you distinguish yourself from everybody else? But looking through the information from SolvaPay, very interesting. It got me excited, partially because of my deep-rooted passion for the platformification of the banking industry. And also, there's a need there for banks to start thinking about how do they modernize everything that they're doing to align with this new channel strategy and new way of engaging with the future shape of their consumers. And maybe another plug for my book here, but we'll see how that moves on. But that's the news article that I picked up on.
Great. And I just noticed, by the way, that my neighbor started to install air conditioning here. So if you hear any drilling noises in the background, it's just bad timing. I hope it's not too bad. But on this piece of news, I think it's interesting from many perspectives. First of all, there's the whole question of value chain. Like you mentioned, SolvaPay is sitting on top of the acquirer, in this case Stripe, and then facilitating these agentic interactions to that acquirer. Now it becomes a question of is this the future? You're going to have this kind of agentic enablers as companies, and they aggregate many acquirers, or is it so that the acquirers will absorb this capability to be in there? And what is then the role of the bank that actually holds the account ultimately, and the customer's funds? What is the kind of level of permissioning, for instance, for AI agents? This thing that the banks also need to treat more or less like a new channel. What is the role of a bank in terms of orchestrating, for example, the permissioning, but also where does the money come from ultimately? Or is that decision left up to the acquirer? What is the role of the wallet provider that we have today? And where does the aggregation play like SolvaPay sit in all of these questions? It's a very living space at the moment, I would say. This kind of value chains have not been standardized to the extent that, for example, it is for card-based retail payments. Again, very clear in how that works. But for the agentic payments, we're going to see many configurations of this as well, I think, and it's very much a moving target as we see it right now.
You're right, but I also think that if we look at this in the context of emergence from embedded finance, we've spoken repeatedly about this. There is changes in business models here for banks. There's changes in operating models for banks. We know it's going to get fragmented to a certain degree. We know we're going to end up with layers or a stack of capabilities. It becomes a question of who does it best. And from a bank's perspective, where do they want to put their focus? The days of a bank trying to do everything are disappearing. You cannot do everything for everyone. You need to put your focus where you can do best. And I think we're going to start seeing this push even harder, where banks really, this whole universal bank, I will do everything, I'm an IT company with a banking license notion, is really dead. And it's going to become more and more focused. SME space is going to grow as well. So I think this is a chance for banks to actually differentiate themselves as well.
True, but at the same time, I think banks also need to be responsible for certain things that they have always been responsible for, which is the basically protecting your assets, protecting your money, and making sure that when you do spend it, you spend it where you intended to spend it. Now, how do you build the pipelines in order to connect to that kind of heart, which is the account and the funds that you have on the account or the credit lines that you have established with the bank? I think it's the where does everybody sit in those pipelines, again, is still looking for its final configuration, if there ever is a final configuration. But the and I think this is going to be very much living, like I said already many times. And I still think that the role of the bank is going to be bigger than it is today, but it's not going to be the kind of the one that all kind of directly aggregates these agents and all this kind of complex world. I think you're right from that perspective. Also interesting, I think when we're talking about AI agents as customers, they will automatically look for the optimal route every time. So then it becomes a question of how do you make your services into the most attractive ones for the AI agents and make the kind of onboarding process and the connecting process as seamless as possible for the agent. And it becomes like almost like a honey trap, if you will. And what type of these value chain configurations becomes most attractive for these AI agents is going to be an interesting game to watch as well. But Janne, so I mean, where are you sitting with with this piece of news in terms of AI agents and the upcoming value chains and hierarchies for AI agents?
Yeah, that's quite interesting because obviously, especially MasterCard has been a lot in the news regarding agentic protocols, and they've been working with Google. So clearly they want to be on top of the game. I guess there are also other players. Visa for sure will be, and some of the bigger banks. But this can of course be a game changer in the value chains. But at the same time, I guess it's also a very much like financial industry in general is very much about trust, and I think the banks will be the ones who are maybe the most hesitant about providing their customer solutions to let AI agents to spend their money autonomously. And I actually have to admit myself that it sounds a little bit scary, but we actually had a discussion around this with Vipps Mobile Pay, MasterCard, and so on a few weeks back. And when you put it like that, you could automate all these small annoying purchase tasks, so then it sounds pretty like it makes sense. But then again, maybe don't have an AI agent to buy you something bigger, get you a car or something like that.
Yeah, it's deeply interesting. It's you have like this very nerdy questions like does the AI agent have a wallet, or is the AI agent a wallet itself? And how do you serve both of these segments or one of these segments? And what is your strategy if you make that decision? So for example, does a bank provide an access credential to an AI agent? And then AI agent is able to collect these access credentials and then combine these processes by connecting to different pipelines, not only payments like identity, other type of verifiable credentials and so forth. Or is there a wallet managing all of this for the agent, and then the agent talks to the wallet instead? So again, it becomes like a very nerdy conversation quite quickly, but the outcomes are quite critical. And to add the final point, maybe from my perspective to this, is it's the liability question that you already touched as well, Paul. Again, who is responsible when something goes wrong is a critical thing, especially from a regulation and banking perspective to figure out, because ultimately, if the AI agent is given a task to buy 12 eggs and then it buys 12 chicken instead, who did wrong? Again, the customer requested for 12 eggs. The merchant sold 12 chicken because that was what was asked for. Again, there's no kind of unclarity from the merchant perspective there. And the bank just execute the payment instruction according to the purchase price. So, and then the agentic, the developer of the agent is saying that, well, it just worked the way it does. It always does this. So again, who's going to end up with the kind of responsibility for the false purchase? These are things that need to be very clearly defined before we can actually see any scale in this, and I haven't seen a good solution to this. But Paul, in final words, how would you like to see the liability on these things, for example?
It's a good question. And like we've already said, this is a moving target. It's a slow march. It's not a sprint. All of this will get sorted out. We've said many times that one of the critical roles of the banks in the future is going to be custodians of trust. And I think this element here becomes even more critical. The bank needs to have a role in this, because when you get to consumer protection, etc., I think the banks will be a critical player in making sure that this is followed through correctly. But at the end of the day, however these agents are engaged, executed, I think there's always going to be a need for the human in the middle. I think for the foreseeable future, at least, even as consumers, we might feel happy to let our agents do something here and there to shortcut things. But I think that most consumers are still going to be the ones and want to be the ones that actually press the button at the end. Let the agents go and do everything else, but then press the button at the end. Although when we start looking at the future of payments around request to pay, variable payments, etc., it's going to be interesting here to see how much delegation we as individuals actually are willing to give to not just agentic agents, but also traditional agents and flows with limits to the banks. So it's a march all in the same direction.
Indeed, and I guess the first stop we will see here is that the agent always needs to request for a confirmation of the payment before it's executed, and I guess that's the first easy thing to do for banks and other kind of payment processors and payment service providers. But it's really when you increase the autonomy, so kind of it can go around and buy a lot of things from different places without supervision, then it gets very complicated very quickly. But good.
Yes, but variable reoccurring payments sort of fit partially into the same space, right? The whole notion that you set limits and allow it to reoccur on an ongoing basis, it could be agent-based in the future, right?
It could be, but again, with these variable recurring payments or indeed direct debits to a certain extent, you always have a clear responsibility chain, because if they billed you wrong, then the billing happened wrong on the merchant side or the seller side. So again, in the agentic, it becomes again blurry at best. So we'll see how it develops. But hey, let's park this. Again, we can talk about agentic commerce, and we will in the future as well. But for this episode, we need to move on because we have two other stories we need to cover. And let's move on and ask Janne, what was the news story that you picked from the April newsletter?
Yes, so I'm continuing quite much where we left in the previous episode. So we've been discussing quite much around SME banking services being the underserved segment where the new players are coming, both local and global players, and some of them are providing also some integrated accounting services in their online or mobile bank, and then some of them are connected to something else, and that's been some what we discussed, that people who are, for instance, using Revolut business account, they've been asking, is it possible to integrate it to some of these major accounting softwares, which we have like NetVisor, I guess, and Finago, and so and that has not been available yet. So that's still like what differentiates the real banks and the neo banks is these integrations. But actually now a Finnish fintech company called NoCFO, so that's an accounting service for made purely for entrepreneurs. So it should be very simple to run. So they have now launched in a quite tight timeline integration to the Revolut Business account. So they have clearly picked up the discussion that's been going online and in our podcast and built the integration. So it's really like interesting news how Revolut is again one step closer to kind of becoming a real full-blown bank by getting these integrations in place for SME customers.
Absolutely. And this is another interesting value chain question. I mean, what is the role of an accounting platform in the role of a company, for example, with regards to or comparing that to, for example, what is the relationship with the bank? Where do you get your invoices? Where do you send your invoices? Where are you getting paid? Who are you working with in order to get paid? These kind of daily questions from a company perspective are critical when we look at who is doing what and where, and who actually is kind of the aggregation point for these kind of companies' daily lives. Paul, what do you think of this story? Is it just another embedded finance story? In this case, with a kind of globally very hot company called Revolut, or is this something more interesting?
To me, there's two sides to this news article. So that on the one side, it's a very interesting continued development by Revolut. They are, like others, looking at how they can enrich the SME space. It's been underserved. We know that there's growth. There are banks looking at this, so not a surprise. On the other side of the coin, I'm going to be a little bit bullish here and say this is another nail in the coffin for the traditional banks in Finland and in the Nordics. I feel that the traditional banks are being arrogant and too relaxed, and believe that Revolut is not going to have an impact. And I think this is going to be a slow death by 1,000 cuts. I do not believe that Revolut is going to turn up, stay quiet, and not much is going to happen. I am seeing Revolut chewing away at the banking market in the Nordics, in Europe, and in Finland, one bite at a time. And I think it's not going to be a big bang. I think it's going to be a slow bleed. And by the time the banks, particularly the smaller banks in Nordics, realize that they are losing market share, it's going to be too late for them to react.
Yeah, we've talked about this before, and you know that I agree. I'm especially curious about this move because famously, Revolut and many of the basically any new entrant to the Nordic market hasn't had access for a long time to the very kind of a fragmented invoicing landscape of the Nordic countries. As anybody who's worked for 2 seconds or has a company in any of the Nordic countries knows that there's 3 or 4 ways for basically to handle invoices in each of the Nordic countries, and they have nothing to do with each other. There's no Nordic standard. There's no clear way or preference that you could pick that would cover all 4 countries. Or indeed, in some cases, even in a single country, you need to integrate to several places in order to cover the pay and get paid landscape with regards to invoicing specifically. So what Revolut is doing here is they're saying that instead of integrating to all of these different invoicing setups in all these countries, in this case in the Nordics, they're working to embed their accounts into places where all this integration and aggregation on the invoicing has already happened. So it's a very key unlock for Revolut to do this now, because this will enable all the users of NoCFO accounting platform to almost like prefer Revolut, because now you have this real-time integration of the accounting flows from Revolut, and Revolut Business otherwise is fairly strong set of services for the SME segment. So it's a win-win. The only thing that I would be looking from the NoCFO side I would be looking over my shoulder all the time, because there always is the question: is this a sheep or wolf in sheep's clothing? Because the Revolut typically doesn't settle for being a pipe to other platforms. So this might be an unlock in the short term for them to get the invoicing covered, but it's a question how long will that last, and how long will it take for Revolut to take over this accounting side as well. But again, remains to be seen. For now, it does seem really kind of as a good move on all sides. But Janne, what do you think? Is NoCFO gonna kind of be steamrolled by Revolut after this, or how will it go?
That's interesting to see, because I still think accounting has a very, like, that has a lot of local characteristics regarding like taxation and local standards and invoicing and stuff like that. So I think that's still a space where there is demand for some local expertise and fintechs, but it's interesting to see, of course, how it goes in a long game.
Yeah, yeah, it is. There's always a local element needed, and when is it going to become global and more kind of consolidated is always an interesting game to watch. But with that said, let's move on to the last story, because there's also an interesting local element in the last story, which is the story that I picked. And the story that I picked was the one where Swedbank Pay cooperates or partners with Klarna. And to put a bit of context around this, so Swedbank Pay is a merchant acquiring solution provided by Swedbank, the Swedish savings bank, the largest Swedish savings bank. And the Swedbank Pay has been around for a long time. It actually has a very interesting history where the Swedbank traditionally has served merchants for in-store payments for a longer time, but then they acquired a Swedish fintech called PayX and merged that into the Swedbank Pay offering and basically enhanced their e-commerce acquiring capabilities quite a lot back when that happened. Now, ever since they've been present in all the four Nordic countries, especially through the PayX acquisition. But they have always remained Nordic. So again, the Nordic market is a fairly limited market, especially if you're working in acquiring. And there always has been this question around that: why is Swedbank in acquiring in the first place? Because it was not too long ago when most of the Nordic banks decided that merchant acquiring, i.e., accepting payments from merchants, or providing services for merchants to accept payments, I should say, is not a business that is it's very low margin. It's razor thin margins on this, and it's very competitive. There are huge global players. We already mentioned Stripe, for example, in this episode, and there are many others, as we know, like Adyen, who are massive players and have global scale and are always going to be very competitive in this merchant acquiring space. So the Nordic banks felt that, that's too kind of high volume business and low margins, so they outsourced that. So traditionally, the banks in the Nordics after that haven't had an acquiring business. And Swedbank Pay has been on that trajectory as well for a long time. So it's not like a big profit maker for Swedbank, has never been. And it becomes a question of how does that fit into your overall strategy. Now, with this piece of news where they're cooperating with Klarna, it's on the surface, when you hear it for the first time, now you're thinking, well, now Swedbank is finally giving up, because again, Klarna is the direct competitor now, especially with the banking license, to the likes of Swedbank. And now what they're doing is they're adding the Klarna buy now, pay later, or Klarna payment options into all the Swedbank Pay payment kind of selection moments with the merchants that they acquire. And the thinking, of course, is that, well, now they're just kind of giving up and giving Klarna a large piece of this because they know that they cannot scale. I don't actually think so. Even though these acquiring plays are many times and most of the times almost like loss leaders for banks, they see it as a way to basically sustain certain business relationships. So whenever you are providing these get paid services to merchant customers, they will also have their accounts, their accounting, their data, everything, their credit lines, their invoice financing, their cross-border payments, their business-to-business payments. They will get everything from you, and that bottom line becomes more important. The getting paid part of providing stickiness for a customer relationship is becoming increasingly important, especially with the pressure of the likes of Revolut we just discussed. And I think this kind of portfolio of sticky points is going to become extremely valuable, despite that you might not be making massive margins with this specific vertical of business that you're providing for the merchants. So providing Klarna increases that aperture of better services and increases the attractiveness of the likes of Swedbank Pay for merchants to remain with that platform with this increasing competition. And then coming back to the local point, you are able to really kind of bring in the local flavor, the regional platform plays and services that the global players will never be able to adjust to. We just talked about invoicing, but we also have like local payment wallets and local payment schemes. Just alone in Sweden, we have Swish. So so Swedbank has always been enabling Swish, whereas the global players need to specifically come in and invest in that in a very different way than Swedbank Pay does. So again, local is always a competitive edge for you if you know how to play it right. But yeah, any opinions? I mean, how often do you kind of prefer to use, for example, Klarna when you see it? And what do you think about this kind of providing local flavor to merchant payment acceptance? Paul, maybe you go first.
I have to actually be horrendously honest and say that I've got a Klarna account. I am not an active user with Klarna. It's just, there are so many options, and sometimes you just end up using what you're used to, if I'm very honest with you. Whilst I lived in Sweden in the early days of the Klarna world, I did use Klarna a lot more. But once I moved to Finland, it got reduced for one reason or another. But I'd still have my Klarna account. So, but I can also see if we look at Swedbank, we look at the dominance that Swedbank has got to a certain degree, the market that it serves in Sweden. I can understand that they've got this footprint. They've got the payment merchant capabilities. Partnering with Klarna on this, there's value in numbers, right? So I can see this as being a not a big growth channel for them, but they've got the dominance, they've got the capabilities already. Look to expand them. But I think you covered all of it quite nicely and in a lot of detail, so I don't think we need to spend a lot more time going around it again.
That's true. Janne, any final comments on that? Do you think Revolut Pay will come and eat Swedbank Pay's lunch, for example?
That's interesting, and I have to say sometimes I really get confused with these layers. That there's there's Google Pay, and then underneath that there's my regular payment card, and now Klarna Pay is under Swedbank Pay. So yeah.
Well, as long as
I don't even try to make sense out of it.
Indeed, at the end of the day, we just pay, and there's a lot of pay. The way, but you're right, the naming is sometimes confusing. But just to be clear, Swedbank Pay is not a wallet. It is a merchant payment acceptance solution. So the merchant can buy this service from Swedbank and then be able to accept typically card payments, but now also Klarna and others, and then basically get the kind of the get paid part of your business up and running in a good way. And now, of course, coming back to the previous story, it's like this: how does this play with all the kind of accounting services that you have and all the reporting that you need to do, and then the invoicing when you're kind of restocking, for example, your inventory, and then all of that management together. Where do you do that? Is there going to be like a one place, like a super app for merchants? Or are you going to continue to use different kinds of platforms until forever? I think this is very kind of another one of these very moving and living landscapes and value chains that we have discussed now many times during this episode. But good, time does fly when you're having fun, and especially when you're getting close to Vappu, also known as the May Day here, and we're going to start to wrap up the episode. Any final reflections from your side, Paul? Do you want to kind of push your book for a little bit again?
Yeah, I can push my book. Of course I can. My book, Rip Out the Core, looking at progressive modernization, will be out at the end of July, middle of July. Pre-order will go live on Amazon. And I am scheduling and planning a release party here in Finland in August. And I am looking for sponsors that potentially would like to help to make it a fantastic launch party and get associated with the book. And obviously in exchange, you'll get a free copy of the book. But that aside, I actually did a little bit of research with my good friend ChatGPT whilst we were talking, because it came up at the beginning, and I can now confirm, and actually to a certain degree, Vil, I'm disappointed with you on this. Bluetooth was invented by Ericsson in Sweden. So you should have known that, having worked for Ericsson, but the actual inventor was a Dutch electronic engineer named Jaap Hartsen, who worked for Ericsson in the 1990s. And the name Bluetooth comes from a 10th century Danish king whose name was Harald Bluetooth Gormson, who was famous for uniting parts of Denmark and Norway. So there you go. It was a Swedish invention, although invented by a Dutch guy and invented by Ericsson.
Yes, and again, I think we had a lot of right elements, because I did mention, no, I think it's Danish, but then I wasn't sure. And then I said, no, it's, I don't think it's just the Swedish. I said that it's going to be a kind of conglomerate of many people. And in this case, it was a Dutch person working for a Swedish company. So I think, we got some of the elements.
No, after all, I was right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Hail Janne, the king of Bluetooth.
Indeed. Excellent. With that being said, Janne, I will maybe a final word for you, because I believe the Nordic Fintech Summit is approaching, and maybe a few words of that.
Yes, just a couple of weeks. Nordic Fintech Summit main day is Thursday 21st here in Helsinki. We have a lot of people coming from fintech companies and banks across the Nordics, but also elsewhere in Europe. We have one track for payments, which we have been discussing again today, but then we have a separate track which is called the Nordic Fintech Highlights, where we will bring all the most exciting things on stage, and also you two will be there, and I'm expecting nothing less than amazing show.
Indeed.
Right.
We will.
So everyone, remember to sign up if you haven't. So NordicFintechSummit.com.
Indeed, we will have a live stage, and we will do a live episode recording to begin the day. So be there early, come say hi and be an active audience. We would really appreciate that. And I'm looking forward to seeing as many of you as possible in the Nordic Fintech Summit in a few weeks' time. And actually, when this comes out, it will be closer to 1 week. But again, hope to see you soon. So again, with that being said, I think we need to close the episode. We have a lot of meetings to go into today. It's a full working day ahead of us. So good. Thank you for listening. As always, subscribe, put on the notifications, the little bell icon that you see, especially in YouTube. It will kind of notify you when you get a new episode, and it really helps us and helps other people to find us as well. And write a review, and when you do, please make it 5 stars. If you have a 1-star review to give to us, please come talk to us personally. We really like feedback, but let's not mess up with the algorithms on the podcast platforms. With that being said, have a great beginning of the summer, and this has been Fintech Daydreaming.
This is Fintech Daydreaming.